My ex-husband thought he'd gotten away with everything, until I decided to play his game better. Subscribe now. The revenge of Claire Winters begins. The divorce papers sat on my kitchen table like a death sentence. I'd been staring at them for 20 minutes, watching my coffee grow cold in my hand. But it wasn't the signature line that had me frozen. It was what I'd discovered 4 days earlier. That was the moment everything had finally clicked into place. I'd confronted Kyle on our front porch, my voice shaking so hard I could barely get the words out. "Where have you really been going?" I asked him. He just smiled, that easy, confident smile that used to make my heart race. "Claire, you're worrying over nothing. Extra client visits this month. That's what a good VP does." But I'd been tracking the odometer on his car for weeks. 420 miles. Every single week. Miles that didn't match any client locations in our area. Miles that screamed the truth I'd been too afraid to admit. I thought back to 6 years earlier, when Kyle was just a struggling middle manager with big dreams and even bigger spending habits. He'd been stuck in a dead-end job, coming home every night to complain about his boss, his pay, his future going nowhere. It was me, Claire Winters, who'd made the call to my uncle. The one who sat on the board at Bridgewater Distribution. I'd spent 3 nights rewriting Kyle's resume until it shined. I'd coached him through every possible interview question, convinced my family that he was worth taking a chance on. My uncle had personally introduced him to Mr. Harrison, the company owner. That handshake had changed everything. Kyle had walked into a VP position he'd never earned on his own. I'd built his entire career from nothing, and now I was watching it all unravel. It was a Tuesday night when I stopped being naive. Kyle had left his laptop open on the dining room table, and there was a yellow sticky note with his password sitting right there on the keyboard. My hands were trembling as I sat down. I knew I shouldn't look. I knew it would destroy me. But that knot in my stomach, the one that had been growing tighter for months, demanded answers. I clicked into his work email and started scrolling. The messages with someone named Olivia started in late September. "Kids are at my mom's this weekend," one read. "Lunch, then our usual place?" The casual confidence of it made me want to throw up. Claire Winters wasn't supposed to find out this way. But here I was, reading proof of my husband's betrayal in the glow of his computer screen. 2 days later, I sat across from a man named Porter in a corner booth at Millie's Diner. It was the one place in town where nobody would recognize Claire Winters. Porter was ex-police, now a private investigator, and he looked exactly like you'd expect. Weathered face, tired eyes, cheap suit that had seen better days. I slid an envelope across the table. Inside were the printed emails and my handwritten mileage logs. "I need proof," I told him, my voice steadier than I felt inside. "Real proof. Photos, timestamps, everything." Porter named his price. It was more than I'd spent on anything in years. But I wrote the check anyway, my hand barely shaking. The price of truth was high, but staying blind would cost me everything I had left. 3 weeks passed like torture. I watched Kyle move through our house with such confidence, so completely unaware that I knew. He'd come home from work, kiss me on the cheek, and ask what was for dinner. At night, he'd sprawl on the couch watching sports, completely relaxed. He had everything. The high-paying VP job at my family's company, the house, the cars, the respect. And he thought it was all safe. He had no idea that his entire life was built on a foundation I'd laid for him. And Claire Winters was about to pull every brick out from under him, one by one. The injustice of it burned in my chest like acid every time I looked at him. When Porter's report arrived, I was sitting in my car in a grocery store parking lot. I opened the manila envelope with shaking hands. The photos hit me like physical blows. Kyle's black SUV parked behind a rundown motel called the Starlight Inn. Kyle and Olivia walking into that same motel at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. Kyle and Olivia having lunch at a bistro in the next town over, his hand covering hers on the table. The timestamps matched perfectly with the days I'd marked in my calendar, the days when the kids had been at my parents' house. 3 times a week, sometimes 4. He'd been systematic about it, scheduling his betrayals around our family obligations like they were business meetings. I sat there crying in my car, clutching those photos, feeling like the biggest fool in the world. I spent an entire afternoon at the public library, researching Bridgewater distribution on their outdated computers. What I found made my pulse quicken. Kyle's VP position wasn't just a title. It gave him access to confidential client lists, pricing structures, and proprietary sales strategies. The company's entire competitive advantage lived in databases Kyle could access with a few keystrokes. Mr. Harrison, who'd taken a chance on Kyle because of my family's recommendation, was obsessive about protecting the company's reputation. He'd built Bridgewater over 30 years. One whiff of impropriety could destroy everything. That's when I realized something. Kyle's career wasn't just his income. It was his identity, his power, his weapon. And Claire Winters knew exactly how to dismantle it, piece by piece. When I filed for divorce, Kyle's reaction was explosive. He called me 17 times that first day, leaving increasingly angry voicemails. The last one made my blood run cold. "You think you can do this to me, Claire? Do you know who I work for? Do you know what I can do?" He wasn't threatening me with his own power. He was threatening me with my family's company, with the position I'd helped him get. That was the moment I stopped feeling guilty about what I was planning. He'd turned my gift into a weapon, and now that weapon was pointed directly at Claire Winters and our children. I saved that voicemail. Something told me I'd need it later. A few weeks after filing, I met with Porter again, this time with a new assignment. "I need you to look into his expense reports," I told him, sliding a folder across the table. "He's claiming massive mileage reimbursements every month, client entertainment expenses that seem excessive." Porter raised an eyebrow. "You think he's stealing from the company?" I shook my head slowly. "I think he's sloppy. I think he's claiming personal expenses as business ones. The affair expenses, probably. Hotels, dinners, gas. I just need you to prove it." Porter smiled slowly, like he'd just been handed an interesting puzzle. "Now that's interesting, Mrs. Winters. A man cheating on his wife and his employer." He took the folder. "Give me 3 weeks." I called my sister Naomi, the only person I could truly trust with this. She worked as a compliance officer at Regional Bank, and she understood corporate politics better than anyone I knew. We met at her apartment, and I laid everything out: the affair, the divorce, the expense report investigation. Naomi listened carefully, her face serious. Then she leaned back on her couch and looked at me. "Here's what you need to understand, Claire," she said. "To a man like Kyle, his career is everything. It's not just money, it's status, respect, power. If you expose him to Mr. Harrison as a liability, as someone who's been stealing and lying, you won't just get him fired. You'll destroy his entire professional identity. That's the revenge that actually matters." I nodded slowly. That was exactly what I wanted. The next 3 months became a strategic game of delays. My attorney would schedule a deposition, then request a postponement. We'd demand financial documents, then take weeks to review them. Kyle's lawyer grew frustrated, but we had legitimate reasons every time. Meanwhile, Porter was deep in the digital paper trail at Bridgewater Distribution. He'd befriended someone in accounting, bought them drinks, asked casual questions about expense report procedures. The picture that emerged was damning. Kyle had been inflating his expense reports for at least 2 years, claiming personal dinners as client meetings, padding his mileage, expensing hotel stays that had nothing to do with business. He wasn't just unfaithful, he was a thief, and I felt vindicated with every new piece of evidence Porter uncovered. Then Porter called me with interesting news. "Claire, I found Olivia's husband, name's Andrew Fuller. Works as a logistics coordinator at a shipping company across town. Good guy by all accounts. Completely in the dark about what's happening." I sat with that information for a long time. Andrew was innocent. Just like me, he deserved to know the truth about his wife. But involving him felt like crossing a line, pulling another person into the wreckage. Then I thought about Kyle's voicemail, his threats, his arrogance. I thought about how he was still seeing Olivia, still lying to both of us like we were nothing. Andrew had a right to know. And Kyle's world needed to collapse on every front, not just one. Porter mailed an anonymous package to Andrew Fuller's home address. Inside were copies of the motel photos, carefully edited to remove any identifying information about me or Porter, and printed excerpts of the emails between Kyle and Olivia. No note, no explanation, just evidence. The package was designed to look like it came from a concerned stranger who'd witnessed something wrong. I didn't want Andrew to know about Claire Winters yet. Didn't want him making connections that might warn Kyle. We just wanted to light the fuse and watch the explosion from a safe distance. I waited patiently for the fallout to begin, knowing it would be devastating. The rumors started filtering back to me through mutual friends within a few weeks. Olivia and Andrew's marriage was imploding. There had been a screaming match in their driveway that the neighbors heard. Andrew had moved out. Kyle started acting different. Distracted during our tense custody exchanges, constantly checking his phone, snapping at the kids for small things. He was getting frantic calls from Olivia, dealing with her emotional meltdown while trying to keep up appearances at work and in court. The pressure was mounting on him from every direction, and I watched it all with cold satisfaction. Every anxious glance, every tense phone call, it was all part of the carefully constructed storm Claire Winters had created. And the worst was still coming for him. Porter delivered his final report to me, but this one wasn't for the divorce proceedings. This was a professional document, formatted like an internal audit, with no mention of Claire Winters or the affair anywhere in it. It detailed Kyle's expense report discrepancies going back 26 months. Restaurant charges on weekends when no client meetings were scheduled. Hotel expenses in towns with no company clients. Mileage claims that exceeded any reasonable business territory. Porter had even found cash advance requests that Kyle had approved for himself without proper authorization. The report was clinical, damning, and focused entirely on fiduciary responsibility. Kyle had been stealing from the company, and now I had undeniable proof in my hands. While Kyle sat in a conference room with his lawyer one afternoon, working through divorce mediation documents, Porter walked into the executive offices of Bridgewater Distribution wearing his best suit. He requested a meeting with Mr. Harrison's executive assistant, handed her a sealed envelope, and left without saying much else. The envelope contained Porter's report with a simple cover letter typed on plain paper. Concerned business associate regarding financial irregularities at Bridgewater Distribution. No names, no accusations beyond what the numbers clearly showed. Just a professional courtesy from someone who supposedly cared about the company's well-being. The timing was perfect. Kyle was distracted, vulnerable, and completely unaware that his professional life was about to detonate. I'd orchestrated every single move perfectly. My phone rang the next morning at 9 o'clock. Mr. Harrison's assistant, speaking in clipped professional tones, requested an immediate private meeting. I drove to a coffee shop 2 towns over, my heart hammering in my chest. Mr. Harrison was waiting in a back booth, looking older than I remembered him. I received some troubling information, he said without any preamble. About Kyle. I wanted to speak with you before taking action, Claire. I told him everything. Not about the affair that wasn't relevant to business, but about my concerns that Kyle had been dishonest about his expenses. Mr. Harrison's face hardened like stone. He's on immediate unpaid leave as of today. There will be an audit. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. The audit took less than a week. Arrogant, certain he'd never be caught by anyone. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Mr. Harrison fired him in a brief, cold meeting that Kyle would later describe to his lawyer as brutal and humiliating. But the real devastation came next. The house Kyle and I lived in wasn't ours. It was owned by Bridgewater Distribution, provided as an executive perk for senior leadership. With Kyle's termination came a 30-day eviction notice. In 1 week, Kyle had lost his job, his income, and his home. The empire I'd helped him build had collapsed in on itself. And Claire Winters had barely had to lift a finger directly. Justice felt cold and absolute in that moment. Kyle showed up at the kids' elementary school during lunch one day, demanding to see them, his face red and twisted with rage. He was violating the temporary custody order, and the school secretary had the presence of mind to call both me and the police immediately. I arrived to find Kyle being escorted off school property, shouting about his rights, about how I'd destroyed him deliberately. Claire did this. Claire ruined everything, he screamed while security held his arms. Our kids watched from their classroom window, their faces pressed against the glass. That evening, I filed for a permanent restraining order. The judge granted it immediately, citing Kyle's obvious instability and the school incident. Whatever tiny shred of sympathy I might have felt evaporated watching my children's frightened faces. I saw Kyle twice during the following months, both times at court-mandated meetings. He was living in an extended-stay motel near the highway, the kind with weekly rates and a flickering neon sign that buzzed at night. His expensive suits had been replaced with wrinkled khakis and polo shirts that looked slept in. His lawyer kept pushing him to settle, to accept the terms I was offering, but Kyle's ego wouldn't allow it. He insisted this was all my fault, that Claire Winters had orchestrated his downfall out of pure spite. He wasn't wrong about the orchestration, I suppose. But he couldn't see that every domino I'd pushed was one he'd set up himself first. His betrayal had created this situation. I'd just revealed it to the right people. The divorce was finalized in a courthouse conference room that smelled like industrial cleaner and old carpet. I got the new house I'd bought with my own money, substantial monthly support, and full custody with supervised visitation for Kyle. He got debt, a ruined reputation, and the privilege of seeing his kids every other Sunday at a supervised facility downtown. His lawyer looked defeated and exhausted. Kyle looked hollow, like someone had scooped out his insides. The judge signed the papers, and it was over. I waited to feel triumphant, but mostly I just felt tired. The victory was real, but it was a shallow one. No amount of justice could undo the years of lies or restore what Claire Winters and her children had lost. A few months later, the local business journal ran a small article about leadership changes at Bridgewater Distribution. It mentioned Kyle's departure, citing financial irregularities and breach of fiduciary duty. Without going into specific detail. The article was 3 paragraphs long, buried on page 12, but in our town's small business community it was a death sentence for his career. Kyle's name was ruined professionally. Companies talked to each other. People remembered. My revenge hadn't been personal or emotional. It had been institutional, systematic, the careful dismantling of a career I'd helped build from nothing. It was surgical, and it was permanent. Claire Winters had proven that strategic intelligence beat raw emotion every single time. Years passed after that. I focused on raising my kids and slowly rebuilding my own career in marketing. I never told the full story to anyone except Naomi. There was no satisfaction in reliving it, no need to broadcast what I'd done to the world. I'd faced an injustice, betrayal, theft, manipulation, and I'd responded strategically, using the same systems Kyle had relied on to prop himself up. I didn't hate him anymore. Hate required energy I didn't want to spend on him. Claire Winters had simply removed him from any position where he could hurt me or my children again. That was enough for me. That was all I'd ever wanted from the beginning. I sold the house Kyle and I had shared and bought a modern townhouse across town. Fresh paint, new furniture, no memories attached to anything. The kids adjusted well. They were teenagers now, resilient and smart and stronger than I'd given them credit for. One afternoon, checking my junk email folder, I found a message from an anonymous sender. Thought you'd want to know. He left the state. Last anyone heard, he's managing a discount retail store somewhere out west. New name, new life. I read it twice, then deleted it without responding. Kyle's self-imposed exile from the world Claire Winters had introduced him to was complete. He'd become exactly what he'd been when I met him all those years ago. Nobody special. I never sought revenge again after that. I didn't need to anymore. My victory wasn't in Kyle's destruction. It was in what I'd built afterward from the ruins. My kids were thriving in school. My career was steady and fulfilling. My life was mine, governed by my choices and my strength. The injustice I'd endured became a lesson in resilience, in strategic thinking, in knowing when to act and how to act effectively without losing myself. Sometimes I'd think about that day with the divorce papers and the cold coffee and the mileage logs. But mostly I thought about the woman I'd become. Someone who refused to be a victim, who'd turned betrayal into power, and who'd walked away stronger than before. Claire Winters had won. Not because I'd destroyed him, but because I'd saved myself.